Hey, I'm Courtney Waterman, your tutor. Lover of anime, manga, and math. And you just tuned into another session of Tutor Me Sempai. Welcome back, everyone. Today we're jumping into a 7th grade topic, consecutive angles. Now, if you're new to my channel, I'll be putting time codes in for this video in the description box below. So use that to skip ahead to whatever part of the video you think is most interesting. As always, if any question about what you see today, or even your own homework, you can always put it in the comment box below, or visit me on my Facebook page at Tutor Me Sempai and tell me all about it there. Today's video should be a rather short one, so leave a like, smash the subscribe, and let's get started. So if you've already seen my previous videos on corresponding angles and alternate angles, today's consecutive angles will be formed in the same exact way. But if you haven't seen those previous videos, no worries, I have a link to both of them right up here. You can check them out at any time. So in order to form our consecutive angles, you're going to have two straight lines intersected by a third line in this fashion. Now, just like in those other videos, these straight lines, these two straight lines here, do not have to be parallel. They can be, but they do not have to be parallel. And this third line is, once again, our special line that we call the transversal. So this is a transversal, and when a transversal intersects two straight lines in this fashion, it generates 8 different angles. We had already discussed that these 8 angles contain our corresponding angle pairs and our alternate angle pairs, but today we're going to see that they also contain our consecutive angle pairs. So now that we talked about how consecutive angles are formed, let's see if we can find a few. Similar to our alternate angles that we discussed in our previous video, today's consecutive angles can also be broken down into 2 categories. You're going to have your consecutive interior and your consecutive exterior angles. However, we shorten them. Instead of writing out the whole word consecutive, we shorten it to co-interior, and this is going to be co-exterior. So co-interior angles, co-exterior angles. So we want to find our consecutive interior or our co-interior angles and our consecutive exterior or our co-exterior angles. So to get started, we have to first figure out what is our interior and our exterior. Our interior is going to be anything sandwiched between these two lines. So this entire space is what we refer to as our interior. That means anything outside of this space is going to be considered our exterior. So this space up here and this space down here are going to be the exterior. Anything outside of these two lines. So when we're trying to find our angle pairs, we're only going to be focusing on the area that is in the name. Our co-interior means we only focus on the interior. Our co-exterior means we only focus on the exterior when we're trying to find our angle pairs. So now that we've handled that, let's break down the co part, consecutive. Now this is the same thing we've done for corresponding and our alternate angles. We're going to break down that name to see what is it kind of telling us about where we can find these angles. What do you think of when you hear the word consecutive? Just like we did for corresponding and alternate, try to think of some words that jump out at you when you're talking about something being consecutive. Personally, I'm thinking of in a row, right after one another. So when I do something consecutively, I do it back to back to back to back. So that is the thing that jumps out at me when I think of the word consecutive. So putting those two things together, we're having back-to-back angles within our interior or exterior, depending on what we're trying to do. And I gave a pro tip in our last video that also applies here. Whenever you're trying to find these co-interior or co-exterior angles, you're going to have to focus one up here and one down here. This is our top. Imagine you cut this with an invisible line, and this is our bottom. You want to make sure you have 2 angles for your pair, but one from each general section. This is our general top and our general bottom. These 4 angles and these 4 angles. So you're not ever going to pick a pair both from the top and both from the bottom. So now that we talked about all of that, let's figure out what are our co-interior angles. So let's start with the top. We have 3 and 4. So angle 3 is here. Now we want to be interior, right? So we're in the interior. Good. We're taking one from the top. Good. Now the consecutive part. Do we go over to this 4? No. Remember, we need one from the top and one from the bottom. All right? Do we go to this 6 here? No, because that's going to be our alternate interior, not consecutive interior. This is not necessarily going to be right after. You're having to do a little bit extra work, right? You're jumping over this transversal. Consecutive angles back to back on the same side of the transversal. So this is going to be our angle pair, angle 3 and angle 5, because they're back to back on this side of transversal. That is going to be our co-interior pair. Now we also have one over here, 4 and 6, co-interior pair. You have to be on the same side of the transversal and also within your given section, your co-interior, interior. Now let's look at co-exterior. Once again, we want one up here and one down here. So we have angle 1 and what's going to be our consecutive one. Now this one is a little different, right? Because we have all that space there. So let's hide some of these unnecessary numbers, and we're only focusing on 1, 2, 7, and 8 here, right? 1, 2, 7, and 8. So what's going to be our consecutive angle for 1? Well, 2 is definitely not going to be it because they're both in the top. 8 is not going to be it because those are going to be alternate exterior angles, right? We don't want that. We want consecutive. They have to be on the same side of the transversal. So this is going to be angle 1 and angle 7. Likewise, angle 2 and angle 8 are also co-exterior angles. So you can see that this follows the same kind of logic we discussed in our alternate angle video. However, the main caveat, the main difference is that where alternate angles went over the transversal, you have to stay on the same side of the transversal for these co-interior and co-exterior angles. Okay, now that we found our consecutive angle pairs, let's talk about what happens when we have two parallel lines intersected by this transversal instead of any two straight lines. Spoiler alert, just like something special happened for our corresponding angles and our alternate angles, consecutive angles are going to have something special happen for them as well. Now, something special happens when we have parallel lines for consecutive angles. If you're following along with the previous videos, you may already have an idea of what to expect. For our corresponding angles and our alternate angles, we knew that they were congruent if you had parallel lines. And if you follow the same train of thought for these consecutive angles, you may think that our co-interior angles and our co-exterior angles are also going to be congruent. However, that is not the case. And visually, you should see that, right? We know that angle 4 and angle 6 are going to be co-interior angles, right? Co-interior angle pairs. However, this angle is clearly different from that angle. There's no way that's going to be congruent. So don't fall into the trap just because corresponding and alternate angles were congruent when you have parallel lines. You're not going to have that same type of congruency for these consecutive angles. But that doesn't mean nothing special happens. Actually, whenever you have parallel lines, these co-interior and co-exterior angles are going to be what we call supplementary. That means that when you sum them up, they're going to equal 180. For example, if this was 50 degrees, the measure of that angle, so the measure of angle 4 equals 50 degrees, we know that the measure of angle 6 is going to be 180 minus 50 degrees, which is going to be 130 degrees. So this is going to be 130 degrees. And this is only going to be true when you have two parallel lines intersected by your transversal. So they're not congruent, but they are supplementary angles. And this is also true for co-exterior angles. So one, if this was, once again, 50 degrees, and I chose 50 for a reason, right? We know these are vertical angles, so they have to be the same, right? This is also going to be what? 130 degrees. So it seems like for parallel lines, co-interior and co-exterior angles are going to be supplementary angles. Now you may be wondering, why is that true? So let's back up a little bit and you'll see very quickly why this is going to be true whenever we have parallel lines. Let's focus on this angle 4 here. We're going to set it to be 50 degrees, just like we discussed here. And you're going to see how the math works out. 50 degrees is what the measure of angle 4 is. And let's focus just on the top part here. Now this top part, if you focus just on the top part, once again, we're ignoring everything down here, you'll see that there is this straight line here. We know for a straight line, the measure of a completely straight line is going to be 180 degrees. And here we have one line that's also straight that cuts it. Now it doesn't cut it in half, but it does cut it. So if you cut it, and if the whole angle is supposed to be 180, we know that this has to be what? This has to be 130, right? Because both of these combined have to be 180. This line cut the 180 in 2 parts. So we know that angle 2 has to be 130 degrees. Now, we've covered that. Let's bring the bottom back into play. This is the bottom here. We want to prove that angle 6 is supplementary to angle 4. We know that angle 2 is 130 degrees, but how does that relate to angle 6? Well, since angle 2 and angle 6 are corresponding angles, and we know that when you have parallel lines, corresponding angles are congruent, angle 6 has to be 130 degrees. And since these two angles, when summed up, are going to be 180, we know that they are considered supplementary angles. And you can do the same type of thing for the co-exterior angles. So we don't necessarily cover that here. So once again, don't get swept up, because in our previous videos, we talked about how parallel lines gave us congruent angles. For these consecutive angles, we don't have congruent angles. We have instead supplementary angles. So I hope you have followed today's examples, and I hope you see that finding your consecutive angles are going to be pretty similar to what we did when we had to find our alternate angles. However, they're going to be just opposites of one another. If you have any question what we saw today, or even on the homework, remember you can always put in the comment box below, or visit me on my Facebook page at Tutor Me Sempai and tell me all about it there. If you haven't done so already, remember to leave that like. It really helps the channel by letting YouTube know that you found this video helpful. And if you found it helpful, so can someone else. So hit that like, smash the subscribe, ring the notification bell, and while you're at it, share this video with a friend. Well, that's all the time I have for today. I'm really hoping this helped with your homework, and I'm looking forward to seeing you next week. I'm Courtney, and this is another session of Tutor Me Sempai.